Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our inspiring content. Here is episode 145.
One of the keys to happiness is simply allowing ourselves to be curious, to learn, and even to fail, and then to continue to be curious after that.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Pat Keeney. Pat is the Director of College and Career Planning, is a career educator, and has spent time in the classroom, consulting, launching a company, and with K12. Pat has also been a learning coach many years for his own son, also named Patrick, and has seen the online experience from that perspective. Although he is presently a product manager, Pat served for almost 7 years as part of K12 Product Development Group, where he was the lead instructional designer on many award-winning high school math and science courses, leading to conversion of 75 labs to virtual and video-based labs, and helped to design games like X-germz. Prior to this, with K12, Pat was a consultant with NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and founded an online education company. His early career consisted of 17 years of working in classrooms in Maryland and Pennsylvania, teaching high school mathematics and science and establishing advanced placement programs in 3 school districts. Welcome, Pat.
It's great to be here.
It's going to be so fun. Virtual education is actually just a love of mine, and I love talking about it and hearing more about it. But before we get into any more of that, can you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm married. My wife and I have been married for 27 years.
Wow,
that's
awesome.
That's the same reaction that I get when I tell people that I used to teach physics. So it's that's interesting. I have a 24-year-old daughter who lives not far from where we live, and we live kind of on the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. Really, it's suburban D.C., but we love the fact that we're surrounded by trees and nature here. I have an 18-year-old son, Patrick, who you mentioned, who just graduated from high school. He'll be headed to WVU for engineering and is a product of many years of learning in an online environment. So we love and are really proud of our adult children. I know my wife still thinks of them as kids. I like to think of them as happy that they are independent and either outside the house or leaving soon.
And kind of more of friends or a mentoring situation.
Yeah, I suppose. And, as I get older, I realize that I can lift less and less every day. And so I'm really happy that God has given us 2 really, really strong kids.
That's awesome. Well, I kind of want to go back and ask you a little bit more about your bio. I mean, you have
Sure.
such an extensive career in education, kind of how you have evolved to where you are now. I'd love to hear more about, career and college planning and some of those things that you're doing.
First off, I've been very fortunate to have been around some really great people in education, and they're the type of people who work hard every day, who are not people who get fanfare. In the time I've been in education, I've seen the dawning of the Teacher of the Year types of awards and things like that. But there's so many great educators who, at the beginning of my career, I was lucky enough to work with a man named Art Petrosky, Willie Waits, who is now a STEM coordinator for a school district over in Maryland. I could not have been placed in a better environment to nurture some of the skills and passions that I had. I started out as a physics teacher and did some math courses as well. And even as I moved through some of the different experiences at working for K12 and at K12, on a daily basis, I'm literally surrounded by people that are talented enough that there's no way that I could fail at what I do. And I know that all sounds really cliche, but it's true. So a lot of what I've been able to do and accomplish and to be interested in is really the product of being surrounded by some great people The other part of it, of course, is a passion for really wanting to bring the active education from the state where in many instances it feels unnatural for students and artificial. We all know that you don't actually have to be in a school building to learn, right? To the point where it is a natural human act, where it's something that we were all born and is into and is natural for us to do. There are many studies that show that one of the keys to happiness is simply allowing ourselves to be curious, to learn, and even to fail, and then to continue to be curious after that. So while there are a lot of different areas that I've been fortunate to work in and I'm still lucky to work in with career readiness, early college programs, STEM, gamification, I think all of those are areas where now we're starting to see in education that students are having opportunities to do exactly that, to be curious about things, to fail, and to be okay with failure, and then to continue to be curious about things. And again, I think that's just a natural act.
Yeah. Well, and I want to kind of talk about the passion that you have with this type of online education platform, and then how you transfer that passion onto kids. You kind of mentioned that we've kind of gone from a place where we feel like you had to be in a certain building, that maybe school was kind of a drudgery, and how you're turning that into, with online education, turning that into more fun.
Certainly. I think at its heart, education should mostly be fun. I know that in many cases, people, even we adults, a lot of times don't have the capacity to endure significant amounts of failure. But at the same time, I think it's all how we couch it and all how we look at it. If you think about the typical grading system, for instance, at a school, and you think about a student having such a small amount of wiggle room to go outside of a particular path that has been dictated and worn over so many years, so that if they get on a 5-question quiz, 1 question wrong, by some standards, by their standards in many cases, they feel like they failed. And of course, that might be a B or a C in some cases, so it's not failure. But on the other hand, nobody likes to have that feeling of failing or of failure. Let's take that, though, and let's turn it around and look at the experience a student has in a game. In a game, and my son is a gamer. He's been through the RuneScape, Minecraft, Fallout 4. When he finds that I'm interested in the game, he finds that that's time for him to move on, because it's like, well, if my old dad's interested, it's not cool anymore. But we've been through that experience, and one of the first things that you do when you get into a new game is you die, and that's utter failure. That's probably on the top 10 lists of here's what failure is. That would probably be near everybody's top 10 in a game. And at the same time, in that type of an environment, people get right back up on the horse and ride it. They go right back into the experience that they were doing. They learn from it, and they move forward with that. And that is a much more natural act, right, as to what learning should be like. One other instance I'll give you is, I don't know about your listeners, Rebecca, and I don't know about your experiences, but I remember doing labs in high school, chemistry labs and biology labs and physics labs. And I'll be honest with you, my experience with those was that my goal was to get the lab done and not to have damaged myself or anybody else. Most of the time I succeeded in doing that, but I remember spilling some really smelly cabbage juice all over myself and my lab partner once, and that wasn't so cool. But, a lab experience can be very rich. It's something that if you go past the opportunities for failure or for success, and I just defined for you what I felt failure was and what success was, and give students an opportunity to experience a lab over and over and over again in an environment where it's safe to fail and continue. I think that's the rationale behind the virtual labs that not only that we built at K12, but the opportunity that you have with virtual labs and with simulations. And that's an opportunity that really online education brings to the table in a way that previously technology was not able to.
It has changed quite a bit, right? I mean, we kind of discussed that before I started recording of the technology that we've seen and how that's been, time and tested and all of those things to only get better, correct?
Correct.
And then tell me, some of our listeners may not be familiar with K12. Give us kind of the mission behind K12 and maybe a little background of how that started.
Sure. So I think, put simply, the ultimate goal of a company like K12 and other companies that are in the online or technology education space is to promote the best student learning possible anywhere, anytime, with any device. And that number of devices is obviously growing and has grown over time. So, for instance, when we were building our environmental science course 4 years ago, or our chemistry course 6 years ago, as the company was expanding into our high school courses, one of the things that we didn't really think about at the time was, so how do we build a course that really is awesome on tablets, not just awesome on the PC or on a laptop? And in a short period of time, we now find that it's not just a desire, not just a nice to have, but that's what people want. People want to be able to learn and gain information and knowledge whenever they want, wherever they want. So K12, actually, I'll digress for a moment. As I came out of my NASA consulting experience, I, through happenstance, really started an online education company. When I think back on how we began to deliver some of our courses, it makes me snicker a bit. But I do remember the day that the press release came out that K12 existed and that Dr. Bill Bennett was involved, and really was excited and fearful at the same time because we knew that they would be strong competitors, but was really excited to see the vindication that there was a company that was ready to make such a strong commitment, not more of a grassroots effort, which is what we really had put together with quantum education, but a company that had financial backing. I think they started with almost $2 million in seed money. And I did not anticipate that I would be working for K12 one day. But on the other hand, I think we were all headed in the same direction at the time. So K12 started by developing courses and at the same time helping school districts and states who wanted to provide an online option for students and parents, the management services for that. So it's something that a school district might not have the resources to be able to dive into. A state might not have the resources to be able to, or capabilities to be able to do that. And so that's something that we were able to provide as well. And in both of those areas, the company has grown and matured. We now have a full K-12 curriculum in all core courses. We have built courses that really push the envelope. We actually have re-envisioned our 6 through 12 core courses, not just so that they are in line with Common Core standards, but so that they're also in line with the expectations that our students have in a world where there are Vines and there's Snapchat, and the way that students interact and they learn are different. And then on our managed public school side, we now manage schools in 33 states across the country, some of them with school districts, some of them as just full charter schools in states. There are 2 in Idaho, our Idaho Virtual Academy, and very proudly, I will say, our Idaho Technical Career Academy, which is a 9 through 12 school that's no different than your typical 9 through 12 experience, except that the electives are geared toward helping a student become more career ready in areas like business or IT or manufacturing or healthcare. So K12 has evolved to the point where, again, we once started with some seed money. We are now a New York Stock Exchange company. I know that people become concerned that it feels like money is leaving a state or leaving a school district and is being spirited off into the ether where some company is actually taking it and using it for profit. I'll tell you that the most exciting thing about working for K12 is that the more we bring in revenue, the more we have the opportunity to push the envelope with games like X-germz that I was able to work on, or with virtual labs, or some of the exciting programs like being able to invest in a career readiness program, which we now will have in 6 states in the fall.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really excited about what you're talking about because I actually remember when K-12 first began, it was really, I feel like K-12 has really pushed the envelope and has caused the public school system to really think outside of the box because, at least in my state, K-12 was the first charter school that was introduced, and there was a lot of resistance, I guess is how you would say it, from the school district, from the state, our own public education, the superintendent, Idaho superintendent, actually withheld the funding from K-12, and K-12 floated it for us, or so that our school couldn't, pay, but K-12 floated that. Right. And so could you talk just a tiny bit maybe about how you feel like K-12 has helped the public school push the envelope? I mean, it's obviously now, instead of having that resistance, they're seeing the benefit that, I think a lot of resistance was they were afraid that computers would replace teachers,
Right. So, I think there sometimes are a lot of preconceptions or misconceptions. And I think as you and I talked a little bit before the podcast, education is one of those areas that tends to lag behind others in terms of innovation. For some reason, as a country, we are far more conservative with regard to changes in education than we are in other areas. So I think there are two words that are maybe overused, and they're the words innovative and disruptive. And that's really the thing that brought me to K-12, is the fact that K-12 was an innovative, disruptive model. And whenever I first came to K-12, my first assignment was to work on a geometry course, again with some people who were incredibly talented. But what I could not have been more impressed with was the detail that went into the build of the geometry course, the attention that was paid to elements of that course, and doing things in an online space that you couldn't do in a classroom. So an example of that is the use of a tool called GeoGebra, which, you having K-12 students, you may have actually seen the GeoGebra tool at one point or another. So I think in large ways, in terms of policy, we have been successful in being disruptive and innovative, and then also being persistent enough and solid enough that legislators understand that we're not building something that's trying to replace their school system or to put their school districts out of business or something of that nature. We just want to build something that's better for students. And then in turn, we have seen them follow. So a quick example of that in the state of Idaho that's been interesting to watch is ITCA, or Idaho Technical Career Academy, actually opened its doors 2 years ago. And it opened its doors with online course sequences in many areas. One of those areas is health science. And we noticed recently that the state of Idaho is building out its own set of online courses now, and that its health science curriculum is almost exactly the same as what we put together. And that's certainly, competition is an important thing, and we have no qualms about that. I think the challenge for us is to continue to be innovative and disruptive and to push the envelope in a way that is healthy for everybody. And so I guess to close, I think we see our role as kind of being the tide that helps raise all ships, even if we happen to at sometimes be controversial. I think we would rather be controversial and disruptive than to just support the status quo.
I'm smiling from ear to ear because being disruptive and all of those things, I think that's where we can, any improvements that we see in education, we can really thank K-12 for it. So, and disruptive is all that we're about here on the Luminous Mind. So it fits really well.
It's a good fit.
So tell me, with all your time and experience in education, how do you feel like your paradigm has changed about learning?
That's a great question. I'm old enough, I'll admit that. I'm not old, but I'm old enough to have seen many changes in both policy type of thinking as to what good pedagogy is, and of course, the introduction of technology. And I remember when people said, well, the television was invented, people said the television would change how education is done, and not much was done with that. But I think the technology that we have at our hands today is certainly something that we have to use in order to push the envelope. So I think from a policy standpoint or a pedagogical standpoint, one thing that I'll point to very quickly is advanced placement as what used to be looked at as a wonderful boutique offering at many schools that the best of the best took advantage of. And so I'm going way back now to the 80s. So in the late 80s, I helped start a program at a school district in Maryland where we built AP Physics and AP Chemistry. Then, as I built my teaching career, that's something that I was significantly involved in at each of the school districts that I was lucky enough to work at. In the early 2000s, schools started to become more prominent, I don't know if you may have taken notice of this or remember this, based on the number of AP classes that they offer per student, or however that metric may have been jiggled around in one way or another, depending on the magazine that you were reading. And we started to enter an era where it was no longer something that schools looked at as, let's do this because it's solely good for our students and we're going to put the right students into these courses. But there were certainly schools that wanted to pad their statistics, so to speak. And so we entered an era in the 2000s where many more students started to enter AP programs and courses. And schools started to offer tens of AP courses. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But one of the reasons that you subject yourself to an advanced placement experience is so that you end up with an opportunity at least for college credit. And that is if you score well enough on the end of course test that's administered by the College Board. And what we started to find as I was winding my teaching career down was that there were now schools that were not accepting credit for the highest score that a student could get. And so really AP had kind of developed and evolved into something that a lot of people took, but in terms of its actual value for a student, taking an AP course, going through that rigor, and these courses are rigorous, and then not getting credit for it when you probably should for whatever reason, that's not something that works best for students. So now in education, we've seen the evolution of a better answer, so to speak. And that answer is dual enrollment, dual credit, concurrent enrollment types of programs. Depending on what state you're in, they may have different names. In the state of Ohio, it's College Credit Plus. But these are programs where students take actual college courses from college teachers and get college credit. And the opportunity to do that online when you have a flexible schedule during your day really makes that opportunity sing, because you can then schedule around whatever your high school courses are, and it even gives you the opportunity to go on campus if you want to and take part in those college courses physically. So I think that shift from the value of advanced placement to the value of now these dual credit, dual enrollment types of programs is one shift in paradigm that we've seen, and I think we're going to continue to see. Our IDVA school is a school where 27% of the students earn some type of credit that is a dual credit, a dual enrollment credit through schools like College of Southern Idaho, Northwest Nazarene, et cetera. And in most states, credits like that are transferable. To piggyback off of that, we also then see programs where instead of students taking courses like calculus or physics or trying to take their freshman year while they're still in high school, we now see students who are taking career-related courses so that when they graduate high school, they're actually graduating high school with certifications or, at best, even associate's degrees in certain areas. And so they're ready to hit the ground running. And that is certainly, I don't know, Rebecca, I don't know what you remember about VOTEC, but I remember the days of there was a yellow bus and students would get on it and they would go someplace. And, you know, the paradigm then was those were the students who couldn't do. Those were the students who weren't academic. They were the VOTEC students, and they would go off somewhere. And today what we find is an era where many of those same types of occupations in manufacturing or IT, which didn't exist back then, are occupations that a 2-year degree will put a student in a position where they are well paid, where they have gainful opportunities for employment, meaningful opportunities, and can move forward that way. So in those areas, certainly education has changed, and I think that change is only going to, the rate of change is going to increase over the next 10 years.
That's great. Well, and I feel like the next question I'm going to ask you is such a great lead in to what we've already been discussing. Before I ask this question, though, I think I want to reiterate what I'm getting from what you're saying is that maybe before in the brick and mortar setting, some of these kids were taking difficult courses, but they weren't necessarily being able to apply it. Those credits weren't transferring, where now we're seeing real life application. So how do you feel like this education platform is really making the learning very supportive to the student's own personal mission?
That's a great question. And I alluded to one of the minor answers to that before, which is the opportunity that a student has to organize their day. They get to move around the Lego blocks of the classes that they take in that day as to when they want to take them, so that if they have an internship opportunity, if they have an opportunity to job shadow, if they have an opportunity to take a unique course at a local community college, it's only offered from 11 to noon, 3 days a week, then they can certainly do that. But in addition to that, colleges are also offering more courses online. Just was able to spend some time at Baker College in Michigan and could not have been more impressed with their focus on really offering innovative programs that, and I don't mean to hammer this theme, but that students can utilize so that when they have completed the program, they hit the ground running. And in order to do that, students don't always live within convenient driving distance of a campus. And if you consider the geography of Michigan, certainly, one part of Michigan is separated from another part of Michigan by a really, really big lake that it's tough to get across, right? So, there are physical impediments, there are individual instances, and an interesting topic to discuss maybe at a different time is equity in education. But there's not always the opportunity to just pick up and go to a campus all the time and take these courses. The proliferation of online courses in the post-secondary institutions that we see is also something that is really valuable. The other thing that I'll hit upon, though, is what we're seeing in terms of how a course experience plays and is structured for students is becoming more and more and more like I and others had envisioned it back in 1998, or there are people who are certainly more visionary than I, so maybe earlier than that. And that is that really, given enough computing power, given the right questions that we ask a student, we should be able to know each student on an individualized basis to the extent that we should be able to serve up the right questions, the right content in the right way so that that student can learn best. And the X-germz game that you alluded to is a really, really small microcosm of an example of that. Whether people know it or not, we have a game that's embedded into some of our elementary courses in mathematics. The goal of the game is simple, and that is to help students learn their multiplication tables and division, addition, subtraction. But the challenge is that if students had flashcards in front of them, they would go through the deck of flashcards and they'd go through them again. And the third time, they knew some of them. They didn't know all of them, but they would have to look at all of them. So what this game has the capacity to do is to serve up the right question that the student needs in order to be able to master that material in the shortest amount of time, so translated the most painless way possible, and to serve that up 100% of the time. So it's not that in the online space, technology is at the point where it allows us to do that all the time, but in certain areas and in more and more instances, we see that able to happen.
Yeah. I remember that being a source of contention long time ago, is that we did a lot of working in our state house, trying to push the envelope of getting people to understand this platform a little better. But the one thing that they would say is, how are you going to know your students if they're all online? And from my experience, I feel like the teachers know them better because they're online. Kind of feed off of that, I guess, of how this online delivery really helps the teacher. And then, like you said, the program starts to get kind of that artificial intelligence that I know we'll talk a little bit more about later, but how the services are really helping the students get that better understanding.
Right. So great question. I think in many ways, in the ways that count at least, we know our students better than we ever have through technology. We are able to capture data and to utilize that data in the act of teaching. Right now, it is done more by hand by teachers. Our teachers are trained in capital letters, data-driven instruction. And so they truly understand how to utilize not just state test scores or things of that nature, but assessments that students take on a regular basis as they go through the curriculum, and then able to adjust the curriculum for that student. Now, it is true we don't know what a student is wearing on a given day, but I'll propose that if I could highlight a phrase that I used before, I think we understand data that really makes a difference in the act of education. And some of the other data, and the argument might be made, but doesn't noticing what's happening with the student become important as well? What about the whole person? Well, we now have a program called the Family Academic Support Team that is being instituted at most of our schools nationwide. It is a support program for students who are at risk. And I think by whatever definition of at-risk people use, there are few families, if any, in the United States that at some point during a student's education are not in some way at risk. And so whether it's to just help a family get over that bump, or maybe there's a chronic problem that's associated with the family structure, we want to make sure that that's not an impediment in student learning and in the overall health of the student. And ultimately, we want to teach the whole student. And in order to do that, know the student. So our staff is equipped with an opportunity to be able to know and understand as an early warning system what students might be at risk. All of our students are contacted regularly to build individualized learning plans and programs. And in fact, in some states, that's mandated for all schools to do. And the last thing, it might surprise people to know, Rebecca, is we have proms and we have field trips. And our students, heaven forbid, our students date. And so I appreciate the concerns that people imagining a very clinical world of all white computers and students with just headsets on all day and things of that nature. That's not something that I think any of us envision as the best experience possible. But I think we've reached a point now where a lot of those old concerns are concerns that just aren't the reality of what online education's like.
Yeah, not valid. I think on this podcast particularly, we have proven that over and over.
Before we go on, let's listen to this message.
Looking for a motivating leadership experience for youth? Foundations of Liberty has been creating revolutionary leadership retreats since 2009. We work with awe-inspiring youth who are realizing and fulfilling their potential. This summer, there are 2 retreats in the Idaho Falls area. Each one is 3 days of powerful immersion experiences. Our website is wedevelopmoralleaders.com. One mom said, "This has been a game changer for my daughter." A young man said, "It taught me the importance of seeing potential rather than faults." These youth are not ashamed to admit that they want to be good and do good. More information at www.wedevelopmoralleaders.com.
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Pat Keeney, using online platforms to direct student college and career planning.
Anyway, one of the comments that I did want to make is that, I think it's great that you've got this family support. That does make a difference in a child's learning. I did have an experience when I was in the K12 system when we had a family that the father ended up with cancer. It was a very severe cancer or whatever. But the neat thing is that with K12, it travels with the child. If she has to miss school because she's helping her father, and I know that is a plus for, I know you have a lot of K12 students that they may have cancer or they may be dealing with some very severe health issues, and they're able to move K12 maybe at a slower pace because of those health issues that they wouldn't be able to do so in the classroom. But it was neat to see her be able to, her father ended up dying, but she was able to be there with her dad and then still be able to pick back up and continue right on. And so I feel like those programs, K-12 in particular, really does help in family situations that maybe it wasn't as a traumatic event as, if she had to be going off to school every day. So anyway.
Rebecca, that's a great story. Very quickly, we've experienced both worlds. And in our family, our children have actually lost all 4 grandparents in the last 12 years. So that doesn't put us at risk necessarily. It's a sad event, but it's an event that you want your children to be able to take part in. And there's a significant contrast between the experience that they had whenever they were online students versus the last experience. My mother passed. My son, the funeral was at a distance. My son came with us. He was close to her. When he came back to school, there was enormous pressure on him to catch up. There was an issue that arose with a particular project, etc. And it's that type of stress and lack of flexibility that is the exact antithesis to what I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, which is learning should be a natural act. It shouldn't be one that has to be on these 2 rails all the time. And as human beings, there are things that come up that we need to be curious about, and we also need to be emotionally attentive to.
Yeah.
And, it's a definite advantage.
Well, emotional attentiveness is part of being able to be socialized,
Yes.
For children to watch their parents going through some of those difficult things instead of, I was just always sent off to school every day, instead of being able to really dive into those emotions that adults experience and that will help prepare the child for those social experiences as well. So,
Right.
Great. Well, let's kind of talk about maybe the services that you offer and some successes that you've seen with your products.
So there probably isn't enough time in the podcast to really dive into those things. I probably hit upon the 2 most significant things that we provide as a company. We are unique, I think, in the education space because most companies in education either make courses or they help to manage schools. And we have the opportunity to do both. That gives us an advantage because as we are adapting and building products, we have the opportunity to gain immediate feedback from 100,000 families. So being able to know and understand just how things are going, what are some problems our teachers are seeing or our administrators would like us to be attentive to are things that are really, they help in terms of being able to guide and build a great product. So ultimately, that's what we do. We also have a division that does sell K-12 courses to brick and mortar schools. And what we have found, you mentioned before that in many cases we've moved past the stage of online education being disruptive and scary to the educational community. And now what we have found is they now have joined us to a great extent. And so we find more and more school districts really excited whenever we come out with something like our career readiness catalog, which we just launched over the past several months. And so now the opportunity to be able to provide in brick and mortar settings courses that will help move students forward in their quest for different careers or even to explore different careers is there. I think on a large scale, one of the things that we've always been proud of as a company is the fact that the longer a student is with us, the greater statistically, by whatever measure you want to use, the greater the gain for that student beyond just gaining a grade level's worth of knowledge. So that first year is usually an adjustment to having both the good part of being online, which is I'm flexible and I can sort of schedule my time how I want to. And then, the rough part that requires some discipline, which is it's flexible and I can schedule my time the way that I want to. So after that adjustment, we find that students do much better than they do generally with their brick and mortar counterparts. So that's something that we've always been proud of. On the other end, looking at our dual enrollment programs, for instance, could not be more excited about schools like our school in Georgia, where over 100 students of a class of 400 received dual enrollment honor cords. In total, this past semester, students at that school took over 1,100 courses, earned 3,300 dual high school and college credits. And by a metric, I know that, numbers can be fuzzy at times, but by probably the best metric we can figure out, those families saved in total over $1.4 million on their future college costs. Wow. So we don't feel like we've even scratched the scratch with many of these things. We know that there's a lot of work to do. And as I mentioned before, I think we want to continue to innovate and be disruptive. But by the same token, I think that those are just just a couple indicators of success with regard to our programs.
Well, and that is a huge success to just your response time, I guess, is what I experienced growing up is that sometimes we had 30-year-old textbooks that we were using, and sometimes the information's outdated, or like you said, it's a very slow process to turn education into something that's working for the child. And so the response time, I think, is a huge success. So if you were to, if you have a family, maybe, I kind of feel like you touched on this with your answer of your students, you're seeing more, the longer they stick with you, they're going to be more successful because they're just understanding the program. Their paradigms have changed about what education is about. Can you give some mentoring advice to families that maybe want to look outside of the box with their education and how to get started on working that paradigm, changing that?
Sure. So I think
that's really the most difficult part.
It really is. And we sort of brought up that theme at the beginning of education should be a very human experience. It should be natural. It should be curious, be able to fail a little bit as long as you're not damaging anything large and not shooting off nuclear bombs or anything like that. And I think as we say that, it's very easy to say that and nod our heads about, yeah, that's what it should be like for our children, for our sons and daughters. I don't know that we give ourselves that same opportunity as adults. I think we're I having had 2 kids, and I know people have many, many more, but having had 2 kids, it may be the greatest source of fear of failure that I have experienced in my life. Yeah. Because it's the one thing that you don't want to screw up. And so at the same time, by having that fear of failure, many times we can pass up opportunities that are the best opportunities for our students, for our sons and daughters. So in terms of advice, it's really simple, and that is give yourself the same opportunity that we would all probably agree is the greatest opportunity that you can give your children, which is be curious, don't be afraid to fail. There's nothing that's going to happen in an online environment, whether it's with K12 or another school, but there's nothing that's going to happen that can't be reversed in some way. There's not going to be damage done to your son or daughter or anything like that. But I do think that one of the exciting things that you will see is that I know, again, I don't know if all parents are like me or like you, Rebecca. I was able to experience that curiosity, failure, continued curiosity with my son and with my daughter. We were able to have experiences that were ridiculously uncommon. So with my daughter, we were able to break up the middle of the day by going fishing and talking about a book that she happened to be reading in her language arts class. With my son, it was a little bit different, and I was actually able to let him reteach me Latin, which I had learned, centuries ago, it felt like, and that he was just diving into. And those experiences, again, a cliche phrase is those experiences are priceless. But those are the experiences that as a parent, I'm really glad that we weren't afraid to think outside the box a little bit and weren't afraid to fail. And I think in the end, we all want to do what's best for our sons and daughters. With my son, he's actually in some of our videos. He got to know K12 way too well. And so that's the one reason that we sent him back to a brick and mortar school that was local here. And in some ways, honestly, really regret that. But I'm not going to be too hard on myself because then I would be kind of violating that law of, we tried something, didn't necessarily, we had the success that we could have had with that, but he's doing just fine. I think he's going to be a great engineer in 4 years.
Oh, that's great. I just remember seeing a meme that said, we can't expect to educate our children the same way we were because this is a different time, a different place and a time. I'm probably totally getting that incorrect, but that is really true, that we do need to take advantage of the technology and what it can do for our children versus trying to keep them in our same system of what we're used to. And I really think the pressure really comes from the parent of, trying to to think. I don't necessarily think that the students, especially when they start out with it, that they think it's strange, whatever.
Right, right.
So, and probably the hardest part, too, for the parent is trying to explain to other people. Maybe the parents got there, but they can't get their family or their friends to come around to that thinking either. So let's talk about what you think some of the advances will be in education in the future.
I think, to build on your point, one of the advances is that at summer picnics in the future, people will be able to tell their friends and family that they're diving into online education with their son and daughter and not be excommunicated from the family. I've heard so many stories that are like that and sort of experienced that. And just, I've seen people make faces that I didn't know the human face could make whenever we told people what we were doing. And anyhow, I'm glad that we did. And their faces returned back to normal. So that's good for them, too.
Yeah. I do have to say my parents were a little skittish, and now they think that my kids are amazing. So,
exactly.
They had their brakes on, but when they see the results, then they are very glad that you made that decision.
Exactly. So I think we're going to see a variety of things in the future. I think the line between secondary and post-secondary education is going to blur. This is the time of the year that if someone who's listening, if you listener were to invest in a search, you would pretty easily find that there are many students now across the country who are earning their high school diploma and associate's degree in college at the same time. And I believe that those students aren't being artificially accelerated. I believe that there are a lot of experiences in their high school years that were recognized as nice to have experiences, but really not targeted in getting that student to where they wanted to get to. And maybe they have earned a CNA or on their way to the next step with a nursing certificate, an associate's degree, and then maybe a 4-year degree. So I think you're only going to see more of that. I think you're going to see more of that in the online space for students who are very bright, but may be 16-year-old mothers who may have just become mothers before their time, or they were ready. But on the other hand, that's a very courageous thing to be and to do. And yet I don't believe that our public school system, although it tries, certainly, I don't believe that our brick and mortar public school system is usually best set up to be able to serve people who are in a situation like that and many other similar situations. One more point on that note. There is a movement for early middle colleges, which I believe is really exciting. And the early middle college idea was actually envisioned and supported by Bill Gates. It's something that has been around for more than 10 years. And it is really about students not going to K-12, but K-13 schools. And in those schools, having the opportunity to do exactly what I just talked about, which is by the time they graduate after their 13th year, they're getting a high school diploma and an associate's degree, or they have accumulated 60 credits. And the beauty of that is that 13th year, they are still in high school, so they are paying $0 for those courses in a time when we find students saddled by debt whenever they get out of college and not having jobs. A program like that is exciting, and we're opening a school like that in the state of Michigan, and just could not be more excited to be involved in that project. So I think, in short, those are some of the things that we're going to see. So a little bit further out, in terms of movements, we're going to see a greater emphasis on non-core. So education used to be reading, writing, arithmetic. And I don't think that we're going to abolish history courses by any means. That's not where I'm headed. But I think career readiness is something that we will see to one extent or another in every high school. And certainly now we're seeing it into the middle schools. And when we say career readiness, we're not asking students to decide what they want to do in 6th grade. What we're trying to help them do first, though, is to become 9th graders and know about more than 10 jobs. I have a colleague who said, Pat, I think, my view of the world is by the time a student is a 9th grader, they know about 10 jobs. They know what their mother does, their father does, they know about teachers, and they know about a couple other things, and that's about it. And that really resonated with me. I've sort of tested that as I've gone around, and I think that actually is pretty accurate. So we want to help students explore, again, that idea of just be curious. We have tons of courses that are exploratory courses. They're available in all of our schools. Courses into things like biotechnology and careers in biotechnology. I wouldn't be able to list them here, but we want to provide opportunities for students to do things like that, and I think you're going to see that broadly across education. You're also going to see more opportunities for students to graduate from high school with more than a high school degree. So either a certificate in a particular area or almost a certificate in a particular area, whether that's an MSSC manufacturing certificate, a pharmacy tech certificate, just something that will help them earn money for college, put them in a position where they can do college or career, where they may be able to take a year off and kind of cool their heels and then move on to the next stage of what they're going to do. I think we're also going to see more in the area of STEM. I had a colleague several years ago. I don't want to scare any colleagues who are listening to this to think I remember everything everybody says, but who said, Pat, in the next 10 years, we're going to find that there's not a job that somebody's going to be able to do if they don't know some STEM. And again, I thought that was pretty radical. I sort of liked it because I'm a STEM person in a sense, but I didn't know that that was true. And now I really believe that.
Yeah.
I was just at Lagoon Park, which was a beautiful day. I had visited Idaho and driven down to Lagoon Park. We had two schools there. We had our Idaho school, and Heidi Higgins was there, and I think you may know Heidi.
Yeah.
And our Utah school was also there, obviously. And the most striking thing to me, Rebecca, was seeing pavilions full of students who were just like me when I was young, except I didn't think anybody else was like me. They had robots. They were crashing them into each other and fighting with them. They had robots that were navigating mazes. There was an excitement that you find at a baseball game when a young person hits a home run or something that occurred when a student or a team would win over something over another team. It mirrors this trend toward, even in gaming now, full stadiums being filled up for gaming competitions. I think we're going to see more of STEM, and I think we're going to see things like coding become a core discipline. It already is in a growing number of states, but I believe that 10 years from now, you're not going to be able to graduate if you don't know some coding of some type. And then longer term, I think artificial intelligence is a game changer. Artificial intelligence, I think over the next year or two, what we will see is we will see drones that all you have to do is tell them you're at point A and I want you to get to point B, and they will be able to navigate that on their own. That is coming out of Silicon Valley, and it will be brought to market in the next year or two broadly. Already exists, already happening. When you think about the lab opportunities in environmental science, for instance, that are possible when a student has a drone like that, to be able to determine how much of a particular area is covered with vegetation. It's just striking. I think it's very difficult. We could all speculate, but it's difficult to really truly imagine what education for the next generation is going to look like if we're not scared of using technologies like that. And then one last thing that I'll add, which is I'm actually not taking a breath because I just wanted to get this in as well. And that is something that you, Rebecca, you may have at this moment and be wearing, and that is some type of wearable technology. And people have Fitbits, and I think we are just in the very early stages of seeing what wearable technology and what people call the Internet of Things are going to be able to add to education. Students are going to be able to get inside processes and understand them in ways that they were never able to. And so instead of just learning facts about pictures of something, they're going to really be able to understand what makes something tick and really be able to affect it and make something better. So I'm really excited. I would love to be a kid again and be able to grow up through an educational system of opportunities like we owe them and like they could have because of the technologies that are going to be realized.
Well, and I think that is one of the advantages. You were talking about, well, we don't expect kids to just necessarily know what they want to do right now, but I think it keeps the love and the fire of learning alive. I mean, sometimes we get into those high school years and kids are just done. They want to move on. There's that anticipation for the next piece of their life, but you're giving them to that. They're not having a chance to get bored, I guess, with the education. They're allowed to continue to expand. And another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to talk about is I've heard somewhere that the jobs that we're preparing kids for now won't even exist, when they finally graduate school. And that's one of the things that I love about technology is that it gets the kid, it turns the technology around faster, so we're not ill preparing children for their future.
No, Rebecca, it's really interesting. I don't know if you grew up wanting to be a podcast host. But I don't think that job was probably around then. And I'm sure that you're only in your mid-20s. And so it is not, it's these types of jobs that you see today. When we talk about preparing students for jobs, we're preparing them for the notion of what these jobs may be like in the future. And whether, again, manufacturing is an instance where manufacturing hadn't changed much for 60 years. And now it's a very clean industry. It has a lot to do with working on a computer, using 3D printers and things like that. And so it's really, really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, my brother is a welding engineer, and he does absolutely no welding. He programs computers that do the welding. So,
right.
So that's the way the future's going. So
exactly.
All right. Well, I've spent so much of your time already this afternoon, but before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words of advice for our listeners? And then please give us your contact information of how we can get in touch with you.
Sure. I'll do the contact information first, and that is because that's the most boring stuff, and that is... And I don't have a book. I don't have, I feel loosely associated with education at times. I just have an opportunity to have a lot of fun. And K12.com is a website worth visiting. I would strongly recommend that the best thing that you could do is exactly what we talked about before. Just be human, be curious, come and see what schools like ours have to offer. And there's no obligation to sign up. There's no obligation to buy anything. But at the same time, even if you don't become a K12 family, it'll certainly open your eyes maybe to what's out there. And there are lots of online opportunities that are out there that are great. Anything associated with wanting to learn anything about K12 that I can help with, my email address is pkeeney@k12.com. That's Pkeeney. And so that's not very creative, is it? And anything outside of K12 that you might be interested in, I'm always happy to become involved in conversations that are visionary, things of that nature. My email outside of K12 is learningcoachk, one word, exactly like it sounds, learningcoachk@gmail.com. I am a wannabe blogger. When I have time and I'm not doing exciting things, I will blog. I wish I had a URL to give to everybody, but for right now, I don't. So that's it. That's what you get. It's learningcoachk@gmail.com. I do tweet. I am Coach K23. That is my Twitter handle, but I don't do it as often as I'd like. I'm old enough that I can't really figure out Twitter as well as I'd like to make it work for me. Advice, the thing that I would advise people to do that has worked for my wife and I think works for families who are in a position to do it and willing to do it, and that is be bold. Be bold. Learning it should not be a courageous, bold act, but today, for one reason or other, it feels that way. And I think we've all come up through a system that while our educational system has done its best with what it has had at the time, I think we're starting to see a time where learning can start anywhere. It can happen anytime. It requires curiosity. And sometimes curiosity is one of the most bold, courageous acts that a human being can undertake. And then the next part of that is also bold and courageous, and that is failure. It's one thing to get everything together and go fishing. It's another thing to sit there and come back without any fish. And then the third piece of that, which is it's a whole other thing to go fishing again. And that's what I couldn't encourage people to do more, Rebecca, is go ahead. I'm not talking about catastrophic failures or anything like that, but just a major return to curiosity. If I were running for president, that would be my platform. And, go out, be curious, fail, and then, be curious some more, because we're human beings. You're all smart. There's nothing around you that was invented by somebody who is much smarter than you. And so certainly your curiosity as an investment is something that will pay off. And it will pay off doubly, by the way, because if that's what your kids see you do, that's something that they'll engage in.
That is great. Well, I will be sure to link up all of his contact information on our show notes page so that you can find him easily. And I just really appreciate your time. It's just been such an inspiring conversation. Thank you for coming and lighting our minds on fire.
Thank you, Rebecca. I have enjoyed being here. Couldn't appreciate it more.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Pat Keeney, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out our Services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of inspiring content, go to the Sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us. Leave us a review. Share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.